All right, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. We need to start streaming. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today at America House. My name is Tatiana Strelchik. I work here as Events and Partnerships Manager, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our very special guest from the United States of America, Martyn Conway, who is a professor at Georgetown University. So today we will have our usual chat session with an unusual guest, and we will speak about sports and intersection of sports and society, sports marketing, and many other things. Right. So we are very pleased to have you, Marty, here, and please welcome our special guest.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I have one on here. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I got into the city on Friday afternoon. So I've had an opportunity since then to make my way around. I love to walk, so I've walked down to the Maidan and walked here today. So it's a beautiful city. People are wonderful. So I'm looking forward to the next few days. So I'm here. Just a little bit about why am I here? Come on in, sit down, find any place. I'm here through a cooperation between the United States State Department and the embassy here in Kyiv. And I will be speaking and working with some of the universities here, and then also with the sport federations, various sport federations in Ukraine on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then later in the week, we'll be traveling to Lviv, and I will be doing something similar there, but with more regional folks, not the folks that are centered here. I'm also looking forward to doing some other things. I'm very excited to go to the football match tomorrow night. As you can see, well, you can't see yet, but you'll know who I will be supporting by tomorrow night. But don't worry, it will be the local team for sure. So I'm very excited about that because I love football. And by the way, I call it football. I know Americans call it soccer, but we'll call it football here while we're here today to do that. So that's why I'm here. As you heard, that's sort of my background. My background is grew up, sports, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But I'm really here to try to help folks better understand the opportunities that the sport industry provides, both for individuals and young people, but also just for the community and what it can do, not just in professional sports, but athletics and activities of all kinds. So I had this great idea, and we had this sort of was working at the hotel, but the polling idea is not quite working as well as it could be. So I'm just going to ask you the questions. So if you just would raise your hand. I know this is old school, but it's raise your hand. Which sport do you most closely follow? How many follow football more of all the sports that they follow? Raise your hand.
Follow as fans?
Yeah, that's your favorite sport. That's the one that you follow most of all. Football. Football. Raise your hand if you follow football, okay? And do you follow local team, the national team? What do you follow? What do you follow?
National team and some favorite clubs.
Which is like what? What would be your favorite club?
My favorite club was Donetsk Shakhtar and...
But are you going to the match tomorrow night?
Sure.
And you're going to root for them? Well, I don't think we could be friends because I'm going to root for the other team. But no, that's okay. I know I've heard a lot about it. I've heard it's very intense rivalry. So every time I go to a country, I try to go to a match of the biggest rivals because I think that's where you learn the most about the culture of sport, is in the rivals. Who else had their hand up? Football? You a football fan? Okay. Club? Which club would you support? Dynamo. Okay. Who else had their hand up for football? You had your hand up?
Football club Professor Alexandria. This is the club of a very small city, my native city.
Okay.
And my father and I, we are big fans.
Okay. And if you go to the matches with your father, right, you would come up. Yeah, that's interesting. Who else had their hand up about football?
I follow Dynamo Kyiv, and tomorrow I will go to the match, the and I work there as steward.
Oh, you will?
Surely.
Awesome. Good. Maybe I'll sit in your section. That would be awesome. Okay, how many of you are basketball fans? Raise your hand if you're a basketball fan. No? Not so much. How about hockey? Any ice hockey fans so far? Any other sport?
Not that I follow ice hockey much, but it's fun. Like the Toronto Maple Leafs that don't win anything,
Okay.
they still have such a huge support.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about an example like that. That's a perfect idea. Who else? You had your hand up. What sport?
Figure skating.
Figure skating, which is big in Ukraine, right? You've had some many world-class figure skaters. Other sports that we didn't talk about. Some, huh?
Skiing, of course.
Skiing, yeah. Anything else? Ladies in the back, gentlemen, others. Swimming.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any other sports? Diving. Okay. Well, that's an interesting cross section. So again, here, particularly in Europe, in certain parts of Europe, we have much more of an interest in the Olympic sports, in the event sports. Again, in the United States, we have a very well-developed professional leagues. We have 5 professional leagues: American football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and then our own version of football, which we call soccer there. Very developed leagues, right? So the Olympics come around every 2 or 4 years. We're interested, but it's not the most important thing. Most follow their clubs who play in the league, okay? So just a little bit about me. First of all, feel free at any point while I'm either here this week or today, whatever you want to do. This is my contact information. You can catch me on Twitter. You'll see me on Instagram. You certainly can reach out to me on WhatsApp while I'm here, for sure. And then if you want to follow me or connect on LinkedIn, I'm there. And then if you're really old school and you just want to email, that's okay too. So there's my email address, okay? Old school.
Box.
Huh?
Do you have physical box to get emails?
Do I have physical address? Yes. I will give you my physical address.
Very old school.
Very old school, exactly. Okay? So yeah, so I'm here in Kyiv till Wednesday, and then I'm coming back again on Saturday, so if you wanted to talk about something or show me or whatever, that's how you can reach me. One of the things that I learned in doing this kind of activities is, for me to stand up here for the next 1 hour or so and tell you what I know, I think it would be somewhat interesting, but I think it would be boring, frankly, because I've been where you are. I've been to school many times and sat in many audiences. I think it's best when you share what you've learned, and that's what I'm here to share with you, is I want to share what you've learned, because some of it may apply here and some may not. So I don't really want to tell you what I know and tell you what the American view or the American way is, but I really want to share what I've learned about sports and communities and societies, not just in the U.S. or North America, but I also do an extensive amount of this in the Middle East. And so when we travel there, it's an entirely different circumstance altogether. I also think it's important for you to know where I came from, how I got here, other than a jet from Washington, D.C. And so this is my way of expressing to you. So this is my hometown. So this is the state of New York. I think I've got a pointer on here. I'm not sure, but anyhow, I think I have a pointer on here. But anyhow, New York. I grew up in a very, very small town called Warners, New York. The number of seats in this room would be almost equivalent to the number of people in town. Okay? It was really small. We did not have a working traffic light. Okay? We didn't need one. There wasn't enough people to worry about getting an accident at the intersection. Okay? And so that's where I grew up. And I grew up probably like many of you did, or if you have children, would play sports all day, every day that I could. If I didn't have to go to school, I would have played sports every day that I could have. We just had one rule, and that was my mother's rule, which is you have to come home when the street lights come on. And the street lights would come on, as we get to dusk and dark, and the street lights would come on. At that point, I'd have to come home, but then I would say, Mom, can I go back out? And maybe I could go out in the yard or to my next door neighbors, but played sports all the time. I really thought that I would make all of my money someday playing professional sports, right? When you grow up and you throw a ball and you catch a ball, that's what you think you're going to do. And I played for a long time, but I didn't play long enough where I would ever make money from playing sports, like many people, okay? So that's my town, that's my community. It is a long way from here, thousands and thousands of kilometers. I would measure it myself, but it would cost me, if I was just flying from my home, about 2,000 euros to fly from my home to here, okay? This is the post office in my hometown. And the reason why that's important, that's where my mother worked for 25 years, at the post office right down the street. So I would walk down the street, see my mom, walk back, and that was the extent of it. Also, we have some things in common because we got a lot of snow where we were. Now, I don't know if do you get that much snow during the course of a winter, do you know? Like when it snows here, do you get many inches, many feet of snow, or does it just snow a lot of days? How does that work?
Sometimes we have 50 centimeters, maybe, not more.
Okay, and do you have snow plows and everything that move it out of the road? Okay. Not really?
And a lot of slush and mud.
It is. So you just wait for it to melt and then you keep going on? Great. That's fantastic. Yeah. So I tell my friends, because now I live down here where it's a little warmer, and I tell my friends that when I was young and going to school, we didn't have days where if it snowed, we didn't go to school. It just meant you went a little later or you got out a little earlier if it snowed. But there was no time where because it snowed, school was closed. That didn't really happen. So nowadays in the U.S., if it snows, they cancel school, unfortunately. This is my house. That's the little house I grew up in. So the picture's a little blurry because I took this off of Google Maps a few weeks ago because I wanted to go back and look and see what it looked like. And I just want to point out a couple things which you might be able to see. Number one, the American flag in the yard. My parents both served in World War II in the U.S. Army, okay? Not in Europe. They were involved in more of the Pacific region at the time. But my mother, every day, made sure that that flag was up and that there was a light on it. She was a very proud American because she served in World War II, as my dad was. And then also, you can see the white fence down in the lower level, the white picket fence. That's sort of the typical American home, right? A yard, a white picket fence, an American flag, and all of that. So I was very proud of the fact my mom long passed away, but that was the house that I grew up in there. Why do I have this? My first exposure to even what Ukraine might be was in my little town, okay? If you were to drive 3 or 4 miles away from my little town, one day as we were going back and forth, I saw they were building something, and they kept building and building. And then they put these beautiful gold domes on top of the building. And finally, we were able to know what it was. And they told us that it was a Ukrainian church. Well, back in my little town, okay, look how far we are away from Ukraine, okay? So when they said they're building a Ukrainian church, we said, what? Where? What is that? Okay? And so for the longest time, we would drive by and really not kind of know. And then eventually but this was, an important thing about this is, this was our first introduction to the fact that there was even a country or there were people living there or anything, was the fact that we had a Ukrainian church 3 miles down the road from where we lived, and we lived very far out in the country. Okay? If you could sum up my sports career in 3 logos, it would be this area, okay? I worked for the longest time in Major League Baseball. We have, our baseball leagues are a big sport in the U.S., and I worked for 2 different teams. I worked first in Baltimore, which is near Washington, D.C., and then I worked in Texas, which is, one of our bigger states, okay? Then I also worked for about 10 or 12 years for AOL, and I don't think that you would expect to remember what AOL was, except if you used Instant Messenger. Did anybody remember or use Instant Messenger when you were growing up?
Yeah.
Chatting back and forth with people, etc., right? So this is what AOL really was. We were one of the first organizations to really bring online services to the rest of the world. Okay, we had operations in about half the countries around the world, and that was, in many ways, people's first introduction to online. Before there was Google, there was AOL. Before there was Facebook, there was AOL. Before there was an iPhone, on and on. Before there was Twitter, all these types of things, there was AOL. And that's how my introduction to what we're talking about today, which is both sports and online. Anybody remember who this is? Who is that?
Bush, how AOL is connected with sport because they provide internet.
Yeah, we had a sports channel, and at AOL that's how we gave sports information to everybody. Hi, Christiane. How are you? That's how we were able to provide information. Yeah.
Do you know actually AOL Messenger is still active, but they're shutting it down on December? I think?
I know. It so hurts my heart when I've heard that they were closing down something that we worked so hard to start up. Okay. Okay, who's this?
Junior Bush and Senior Bush.
Okay, so George W. Bush. Okay. So I'm going to keep this story relatively short, but this is how I knew, okay? Once I met George, we called him George at the time because he was not in politics. He was a part owner of the baseball team, the Texas Rangers, okay? So when I moved, he greeted me and said, "We're happy to have you. We're doing all these great things." And so I got to know George when he was an owner of a baseball team, not a politician or anything. So his father, in 1992, he was up for re-election and he lost to Bill Clinton. Everybody knows President Clinton, right? Knows that name. He lost. Well, George and I, we were both athletic and we were both exercising a lot, so we would often meet in the locker room, change into our running clothes, and at lunchtime or middle of the day, go on some runs, 4, 5, 6 miles. George liked to run. He liked to bike. And so, now remember, he owned a baseball team. He had never been in politics before. He was so mad. One day we were running and he was so mad that his father had lost the election. He was really mad, really upset. And we were running and he said, "I want to talk to you about something when we're finished." I said, "Okay, good." So we get finished, we take our showers, we're walking back to the offices, and he says to me, "I want to ask you a question. I'm thinking about running for governor of Texas." Now, Texas is one of our biggest states, as you know, in the U.S. He said, "I'm thinking about running for governor of Texas next year, a year from now." And I said, "Oh, interesting. Why do you want to do that?" And he said, "Well, my dad, I really feel like I should do something now that my dad's no longer in politics and we serve." And he said, "And by the way, the woman, governor, who had a lot to do with him losing, she was still going to run again." So mind you, George is not in politics. Now he's thinking about running against somebody who's a governor who's already in position. Okay? So we're talking about it, and he said to me, "What do you think I should do?" And we're walking, and I said, "Look at it this way, George. You're the owner of a baseball team. You get great seats. You get to sit in the front row. People come and ask you for your autograph. You get free food. You have all these things." I said, "Call me crazy, but why would you want to give that up?" And he said, "Well, sometimes you have to do whatever." And so we get into the building, and we're going to our offices, and we're walking down the hall, and he says, "So what's your answer? Should I do it or not?" And I said, "George, do whatever you want, but I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's going to work." Well, guess what happened? What happened? What happened?
He still ran for the office.
He ran for the office, and what happened?
He was elected.
He won.
Yeah.
He won twice, the governor of Texas.
Yeah.
And from governor of Texas, he ran for what?
CIA.
No, this is George W.
Oh, yeah.
Then he ran for president, and guess what happened? He won.
He won, yeah.
And he won twice,
Right.
right? So I saw George about, probably about 5 years, 2010, he was out of office. He came to one event, and I knew that he was coming, and so I made arrangements with one of his people that set up everything, and I said, if you get a chance, he's like, "Yeah, sure, we'll make sure that happens." So we have this little room, and we have private people, and he sees me, and he recognizes me. He says, "Hey, how you doing? Come on over here." So I come over, and he goes, puts his arm around me, he goes, "Hey, buddy, do you remember when we were running?" I said, "Yeah, I remember when you were running." He said, "Do you remember what advice you gave me?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember." He said, "Didn't work out so well." He said, "You might want to stick to your day job." So I knew right away that I should not be in politics or give political advice. My career was simply in sports, because if I couldn't give him political advice and he won president twice, then I shouldn't stick with it. So that was how I confirmed my career in sports. So here's the question that was going to be the next kind of polling question, which is, I want to ask you all from your own perspective, as you look at the future of sports in Ukraine, there are obviously going to be some very big challenges to do the kind of things that people might want to do. As you look at these choices, lack of money just generally, lack of leadership, corruption, or the lack of sports facilities, what do you all think are one of the top 2 reasons why, or the biggest challenges for sports in Ukraine, based on the list that's up there? How many say lack of money? How many would say lack of money for sports?
Probably.
Lack of money? How many would say lack of leadership for sports? One of you. How many would say potential for corruption in sports?
Totally.
Typically the hands are going up. And then lack of sports facilities. I don't think you lack for sports facilities based on what I've seen. But ever since I've been here and what I did in my research for coming here, that question about corruption kept coming up. Not just in sports, but in other types of areas. And what I learned very clearly, in fact, when I opened the Kiev Post today, when I was reading it at breakfast, it was all about reform. It was all about reform. And it seems to be the hot button issue, particularly of younger people in this country who are so committed to reform. Is that true? Would I be right about that? Would I be right about that? Yes? Huh?
This is hype.
It's what?
Hype.
Hype? Hype on reform? Okay. Is it possible to reform the institutions that we have? I think it probably is, right? What's that?
Everything is possible if we have to
But
first.
corruption in sport is very, very good.
If we fulfill to first.
Because one of the things that we're going to talk about with our groups, I'm going to be talking about them during the course of the week, is one of the things that Ukrainian sport federations want to see is they want to see more commercial relationships for their sports. They want to see more sponsorships, more money, etc. And one of the things that's going to have to happen is before any partners, is think about if you went out and asked people for money, before you can get a lot of money, people are going to say, yeah, but do I trust you? Do I trust you to get back what you're giving me? If I give you money, will you give me something in return that's as valuable as money? And I have to trust you. And so they have to build that trust between the sponsors and the federations and the organizations that run sports to say, if I give you money, I know what will happen to it, right? That I trust you on that. And that's going to be a challenge. It's not just here, but it's a challenge in many places as well with respect to sports. So one of the things I was also looking at was, what do we have in common between the U.S. and Ukraine? And we have a lot in common. First of all, clearly we are both 2 countries inspired by revolution. Ours happened 225 years ago. Yours are happening in the more recent years. But we are born of revolution, both countries, right? We were breaking away from other countries, other governments. Clearly that's what we were doing. We've been successful at it for a while. We certainly share the same dream that we're committed to freedom and democracy. I clearly hear that from everybody that I've talked to in the months before coming here and since I've been here. Clearly committed to that. I also know for certain that the future of this country, just like the future of the United States, rests on the youth, rests on the people that are under 35, under 40 years old, who are going to be the next round of leaders, for sure. There's a certain compassion here for people oppressed, not just in this country and this region, but around the world, okay? And then also, just like we talked about at the very beginning, sport is at the heart of our society, whether it is our teams, whether it is our national teams, whether it's our Olympic teams. They really are at the center of what. There's one other thing that Ukraine and the USA share in common now, particularly about sports. What do you think that is? There's one other thing, it's a big thing too, that we share in common. What could it be? What could it be? What do you think? What do you think? What could it be? Huh?
All branches of branches of life of any society are practically the same.
Okay.
What do you want to hear?
Okay.
It's not sport.
What else do we have in common, particularly with respect to sports? This is going to be hard. I'm just going to tell you on the next slide, it's going to be hard, so you might have to cover your eyes. Okay?
Drugs.
Striving for championship.
No. We're both not going to be in Russia in 2018. I told you it's going to hurt. I told you it's going to hurt.
Use of drugs.
Because I kept track. I was watching the Ukrainian qualifying matches, and I was watching, and I was in touch with my friends, and I said whatever, and then I saw the result from the Croatia match, and I said, oh no, it really hurt my heart. Then what happened? The next day, the United States went down to Trinidad and Tobago. Anybody know where that is?
Yeah.
It's a really small island in the Caribbean, really tiny, has 1.3 million people. The U.S. has 320 million people. We went down there to play a football match, and we lost. We lost to Trinidad in football, and we're not going to the World Cup because of that. People are very mad. I don't know how mad they are here in Ukraine about your team not going to Russia, but they're very mad about the U.S. not going to Russia because the United States feels entitled sometimes. Oh, we should be there. We're one of the biggest countries in the world. So we share this heartbreak, and trust me, it really broke a lot of people's hearts in country. Okay? But what I really want to talk to you about today is sort of moving forward is, and maybe you haven't thought about it in this way before, but after today, hopefully you might, and that is the role that sport plays in society, particularly progressive and economically strong societies. Okay? I'm going to show you a video here in just a few seconds from Nelson Mandela, but I think he put it really well. And some of the words that he chose, he talks about how sports inspires. He talks about how sport develops leadership. He talks about sport as a language. Literally, think about it. Sports is actually a language because when we look at it, no matter what sport we're talking about, we understand. If you and I both watch the same sport, we don't need to even talk in English or Ukrainian or Russian. We're watching the sport, we understand. We understand the same thing, particularly if we're fans of the same sport, right? On Sunday night for the match, we're going to understand what's going on, even though we don't share as much in the way of the same language, okay? So I want to play this video of Nelson Mandela talking about it when he made this speech about 15 years ago.
It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination. The heroes that standing with me are examples of this power. They are valiant, not only in the playing field, but also in the community, both local and international. They are champions, and they deserve the world's recognition. An active, vigorous Hall of Fame. A Hall of Fame that goes out into the world, spreading hope, inspiration, and hope. Their legacy will be an international community where the rules of the game are the same for everyone, and behavior is guided by fair play and good sportsmanship. I ask you now to rise and join me in commending the original inductees into the World Sports Academy Hall of Fame.
So I think that Mandela put it so beautifully just in that 2.5 minutes, because what he talks about is when we send our athletes out to the field, out to the track, out to the court, number one, it's the same rules for everybody, right? There's not 2 sets of rules. There's not 3 sets of rules. There's not rules by region. There's not rules by language. There's not rules by ethnicity or gender. It's just one set of rules, right? The other thing is it's a competition, but at the end of that competition, it's really about sportsmanship, and it's about building relationships. Many years ago, when the U.S. had difficult relations with the Chinese or the Iranians, we would often send a sports team first, a ping pong team to China, a wrestling team to Iran. Okay, they were the first ambassadors into those areas where we didn't have a connection. He also talked in there about opportunity, right? Think about some of the greatest athletes in the history of our world, where they came from. Who would have ever thought that the best sprinters in the world would come from Jamaica? Why would that happen? Why wouldn't the best sprinters in the world come from some place that would have the best training and the most money and the best facilities and all these sorts of things? I've seen the training facilities in Jamaica. They're not fantastic. They are certainly not where you would think. And that's just one example. Why do the best runners from Kenya or Ethiopia or other places? It's because of opportunity. And the last thing I would say, sports is the kind of vehicle that can bring people from the lowest of lows, from the most impoverished people in the world to the most successful people in the world. We're going to go through some people here a little bit later, and I want you to just keep that in mind, because they became leaders, truly leaders in the world, who came from some of the poorest communities in all parts of the world. But this was a way to be upwardly mobile and to generate wealth and then to redistribute that wealth in different places. Okay? So it's really important. The other thing, this is what Phil Knight said, and Phil Knight founded Nike many years ago and until recently retired, really drove a lot of kind of the sports marketing, that modern sports marketing that we have today. And he talks about this as I've learned to talk about it, which is in a couple ways. Number one, an international language, like I talked about, when we're both watching the sport or both watching a track event or tennis or volleyball or golf. It's an international language. And the second, he compares it to rock and roll. And I would extend that and say almost any genre of music that you want to compare it to. How many of you have been to a musical performance? Raise your hand if you've been to a musical performance of any kind. Concert. Some of you are not raising your hands. I know you've been. Okay? All right? And think about it, especially if it was a big show, a concert, Rolling Stones, whatever it is. You go to the show, and it's exciting, but you feel it right here, right? You feel it right here, because that's the only other reason you stand up on those chairs, because when you go home, you're not allowed to do that. But when you go to a concert, you yell and scream, and you stand on the chairs. Your parents would say, stop that, because you feel it in here. And that's what he says about sports, too. You feel it in here. It's one of the few things where that happens. It's not here, it's right here, and you feel it all throughout your body. That's why it's so important, okay? For me, and this is my own take on it, I think sports is one of the 6 global languages. Forget the spoken language, the most popular, the English, the Spanish, the French, etc., etc. And I look at it this way. Music, dance, art, food, fashion, and sports are 6 common languages. Again, we don't have to speak, right? Example, I can serve you a plate of food. I don't have to even tell you what it is. You know if you like it or not. You might know more about it. If you want to know more about it, you get involved. The same thing with fashion. And here's my challenge. Here's how I think this, why I think this works so well, is if I took you and we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go on an airplane together, okay? But I'm going to blindfold you and put you on the airplane, and I'm going to take you on the plane, okay? And we're going to fly for 7 or 8 hours on the airplane. You're going to be blindfolded. We get off the airplane. You're still blindfolded. We get in the cab, and now we're going to go from the airport to our hotel in downtown, wherever it is. As soon as we get out of the airport, I'm going to take the blindfold off of you. And now we both have our eyes in the cab as we go downtown. Think about what you're going to drive past between the hotel and downtown. You're going to drive past schools. You're going to drive past fields. You're going to drive past parks. And what's going to be happening there? What's going to be happening? Kids are going to be doing what? Playing sports. I wouldn't even have to tell you where we were, like when we got off the plane, because as soon as you saw those kids playing cricket, you probably would know where you were. And as soon as you saw those kids playing football on a dirt stadium floor or just out in the street, you probably would have a better idea of where you are. And you can do that with so many different sports. That's what I mean, is sometimes we identify the community based on the sport first, right? Like I said about the Jamaican sprinters or the great soccer players in Brazil or all those sorts of things, okay? That's what I mean when I say it's one of those languages, because I can fly into a country, get in a car and drive, and within 5 or 10 minutes, I probably will know where I am if I had amnesia and didn't know, because I would look at the sports that they're playing, particularly if they're playing them well, okay? Sports is transcendent. Okay, I was telling you that one of the programs I've been involved in for the last 2 years is Georgetown has a relationship now in Qatar. We have a university there for 10 years. And as part of that relationship, we're actually teaching and training young people because they would like to, Qatar is going to host the World Cup in 2022. And one of their pledges is they would like to have that World Cup come and go. And when it leaves, to leave behind a sport culture. And that means also people who are young people who've been trained in the industry and can actually work in the sport industry, because right now they really don't have that. And these are my friends from Saudi Arabia that I met, okay? Just in a situation just like this. They were part of the group. And my friend on the left, I love baseball. I played baseball. I brought my ball and 2 gloves. And I would say to people at the beginning of the session, anybody here not played baseball before? And all the hands went up in the Middle East, let's be honest, okay? And so my friend from Saudi Arabia said, yeah, me. I said, let's go out in the hall. We're going to play catch. And we did that. I wish I could show you the video, because there is a video. Here he is in his formal dress with a baseball. He's clearly not played baseball before. You can tell by the way he's holding the glove. Okay? That was the first giveaway. Okay? And so, but on the second side, this is the 4 of us at a football match. 2 Saudis, myself, and a female. And if you know anything about females in Saudi Arabia, they don't hang out at soccer matches together in Saudi. Okay? But in Doha, they did. Okay? So that's what I mean about that. The same thing here. This was some of our groups that we were teaching in sports. Now all of a sudden they think they're gangs. They think they're cool. They give you the sign. They do the whole thing, right? So when they say, as soon as we said sports, everybody came running from all different places, from all different walks of life. Okay? So again, this was our next poll question, but I really want to ask, just by show of hands, when we think about impactful athlete, not the one that makes the most money, not the one that scores the most goals, but who you think in terms of impactful athlete. How many people here think Ronaldo is the most impactful athlete in the world today? Raise your hand if you think Ronaldo is. Okay, 3 or 4. How many think Messi is the most impactful athlete in the world today? Same, 3 or 4. A couple, 5 or 6 maybe. How about Roger Federer? How many think Roger Federer is the most impactful athlete? Huh? Okay. How about Serena Williams? How many think Serena Williams is the most impactful athlete? Why do you think Serena Williams is the most impactful athlete?
She's a woman, well, like, in sort of gender that makes the sport popular in different social groups.
Mm-hmm. And when you think women's tennis today, you think Serena Williams. Mm-hmm. Now, there's been other times where we've thought of a different name for Martina Navratilova or whatever during those decades, right? But that's what I'm saying is sometimes an athlete can totally transcend their sport. And I think these 4 for sure. Anybody else that's not up there, because there would be some others on here that you don't think are on this list that you think are that impactful or that transcendent to sports. Like Usain Bolt, like I said. All of a sudden, everybody in the world knows Usain Bolt, even if you really don't know much about track and field, but you follow the Olympics or whatever. Anybody else like that? Names? Huh?
He's runner.
Who?
Bolt. Runner.
Yeah, Usain Bolt? Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Other names?
Pelé.
Pelé.
Yeah.
Awesome from that time. Pelé, right? When you saw Pelé, you saw football all over the world. Didn't matter. Everybody knew that man, knows that man by face. Okay, we're going to talk about one more of those people later on. Anybody else?
Can you say Schumacher? It's not really like sports.
Could, absolutely. To different parts of the world, Formula One, Schumacher, now maybe Lewis Hamilton, or, you know, to see that, right? These are people who, they transcend the sport. In other words, once you see them, you say, oh gosh, maybe I should be interested in Formula One or whatever that is. Okay? We do the same thing with entertainers and celebrities to a certain extent, but athletes. Okay? In fact, on this list, Roger Federer is the most valuable athlete in the world, meaning from his winnings on tennis to his winnings in endorsements, he's the most valuable athlete in the world. And have you ever seen a nicer person than Roger Federer? How could you ever root against Roger Federer? You might like Nadal, and you might, but every time I see Federer, I think, what a nice guy. He never screams, yells, he doesn't get upset, doesn't smash his racket. I don't know if he's ever made an enemy in his life. It must be great to go through life like that. Okay? So these are some of the other things about sport. We self-identify through sports. I was looking out over here today. I don't see, but usually when we do something like this, someone comes in and they're wearing a jersey or a shirt of their favorite club or team or a national team. Okay? But we self-identify through sport. Okay? The second thing is, as we become a fan, it's more than that. It's when we join that community of interest. What do I mean by community of interest? We all share that common interest for that day, for that night, for that week. Okay? Think about the various communities of interest. It's music, it's food, it's fashion, right? Where suddenly we're like that. But the last thing, and most important thing, is through sports we become a better you. What do you think I mean by that? Through sports we become a better you. Meaning you become a better you, I become a better me. How does that happen? How does that happen? What do you think is happening psychologically to people?
It helps us to reach our goals
Yeah.
in our life. It makes you stronger
Mm-hmm.
in your life, and it proves your career, I think, in a life.
So she's absolutely right. There's two parts to it. Mentally, we think of ourselves as better when we are a fan of that team, especially when that team is doing well and that country is doing well. It raises our self-esteem. Think about the power that happens when a club or a country does well in the Olympics or the World Championship. We've seen it transform an entire psyche and self-esteem of a country, let alone people individually. And then, of course, physically it can help you too. If it's not just about professional sports, it's about amateur sports, it's physical too, right? So it helps you become a better you. And so if we can get kids involved from the youngest ages, and forget the fact that they think they're going to someday be another Messi, if they would just stay involved through that time, think of how much better they would be. And particularly for females. Particularly for females. Now I'll just tell you, I have 3 children. 2 of them girls, 1 boy. And I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD. I've been married to the same woman for 35 years, and I have two girls. So that puts me maybe an expert on 3 females in the world at the most. Okay? But I can assure you, through their participation in sports as they grew up, their self-esteem was way different than those girls that didn't. They thought of themselves as capable, as strong, as organized, as being able to be a leader. And I saw the difference around the ages of 13 when I was coaching and had kids. Around the age of 13, the girls that would stop playing and the girls that would continue on, and then I watched them carefully, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and see the difference of how much more comfortable and self-assured that they were through their participation in sports, through their competition, okay, and what it meant. Both the winning and the losing. How you deal with winning and how you deal with disappointment when you lose. And I think that's so important, particularly for females around the world, the more that we can do that. So this is one way that I think we can understand the impact that sports has that other businesses and other industries don't. Okay? And it's really sort of simple like this. For most products that we buy, and we buy sports like a product, for most products that we buy, We shop around, right? Whether it's on the internet or on malls, shopping centers, things like that. We shop around. We consider. We say, do I want that one or do I want that one or do I want that one? How many of you here like to shop? Raise your hand. Come on, be honest. Thank you. You like to shop? Why do you like to shop? What's good about shopping for you? Does it make you feel good?
Yeah.
It does, right? Because it's not just about buying something, it's about what?
Relieving stress.
Finding a good deal. Do you shop with your friends? Yeah, well, it's social, right? We go out shopping together and we laugh and we have fun and we stop to get something to eat. It's an experience, okay? So we shop, then we consider. We say, oh, maybe that one, maybe that one. Oh, do you like this one? You get other people's opinion, right? You say, I was thinking about buying this, what do you think? And they tell you, right? Am I right? Absolutely, I know my shopping for sure, right? And then we make the purchase, and then we buy it. We bring it home, fantastic. We wear it, we do whatever. We do the same thing in sports. We shop around, which team am I going to support, which club, what am I going to do, which sport. We consider, then we make a purchase decision. We buy a ticket, we go to a match, we subscribe to the media to watch it on television, we do that. But then we do these other two things that other products don't, and I can guarantee you that they don't. I'll show you in a minute. Number one, we bond with that organization or with that team. Okay? We are committed. We talked in here about who you support. If you go to England, anybody been to England before? Okay? The soccer football fans there, they die with their team. There's no separating them. You grew up there, sorry, it's your team. There's no such thing as saying, well, I grew up as a fan of Manchester United, but I'm really a fan of Chelsea. That doesn't happen over there. You would get burned for that. Okay? So we bond. But then we do this other thing that nobody else does. Sports products, people, they advocate for their product. How do they do that? They wear it, right? I'm just looking around here, and I think this is one of the great products of our generation. 2007, first iPhone, 10-year anniversary of the first iPhone. Other than the computer and the telephone, this might be one of the greatest inventions of our generation. Would you agree? Use it every day? Use your phone every day? Now you live on it, right? Exactly. Okay? But here's your test. For the next week or two, say, oh, hey, Mr. Conway, he's like, go down the street or go anywhere. How many people wearing an Apple t-shirt or an Apple hat? None. Zero. Zip. We love our iPhones. We depend on them. But we don't wear their shirts. Right? Now, in the next week or two, go down the street. Tell me how many soccer kits or jerseys we see. Or football or whatever you want to say. Right? Or hats. Or scarves. Right? That's what I mean. For our sports relationship, we advocate because you know why? Why do we advocate? Why do we wear those things? Why do we wear the shirts or the scarves and all that? Why do we do that?
Promotion.
Huh?
Promotion.
No.
Show your pride.
Deeper than that.
To find the same of our kind.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Identify with them.
To find the tribe. We find our tribe. Right? Even though we kind of look the same, we feel the same. When I see those people, I say, those are my people. Right? And if they're over there doing whatever, I'm like, I'm going with my people, right? Very tribal. That's what we do in sports. So we advocate, we do that. We don't go to the shopping mall and say, I'm going to go see all the friends at Apple. We don't do that, right? Or Microsoft or whatever, Google. Nobody cares about Google other than to use it for searching. We don't love Google. If there was a better product that did it in half the time, we'd go do that. But we don't throw away our relationships with our sport organizations, our teams, or our federations and all that. We stick with them. Okay? So the rest of the business world functions over here, and the sports world has all of this. And that's why we're so passionate about it. Those are the things that happen. Sports can also be cynical or sentimental, right? We see this now with FIFA or the IOC, where we say, come on, guys, what are you doing? Where's all the money going? Why aren't you? All these kind of things. We become very cynical quickly through sports sometimes because we lose faith or trust in our leaders. Okay? But we also become sentimental. Who had the example earlier about staying with the team even when they didn't win? What was the team? Shakhtar. Okay. I can go Shakhtar 100 years better. Here's the example. Last year, the Chicago Cubs, an American baseball team, had not won the World Series in 107 years. The pinnacle, right? The World Series, it's like winning the Champions League, whatever, to win the World Series. 107 years. Do you know how many generations of people were Cub fans? And guess what would happen? The Cubs would get to the end of the season. They ain't winning. They're losing. But I love them. I can't leave them. Right? I can't leave them. So last year, finally, after 107 years, they won. Now here's a true story. This is a friend of mine. Okay? His dad had long passed away. He was in his 50s. His dad had long passed away. And his dad had always said to him when he was growing up, Jason, if the Cubs ever get to the World Series in Game 7, I'll take you. We'll go together. Okay? And he would say that all the time. His dad passes away 15 years ago. Cubs never do it. Last year the Cubs come to the World Series, and guess what? They have a Game 7. Now, this is a grown man, okay? This is a man in his 50s. He remembers that conversation that he had with his father all the time. So he says, I guess I got to go to the game with my dad. He literally gets a little radio, he gets his chair, and he goes out to the cemetery where his dad is buried. And he puts his chair down next to the tombstone, and he gets his radio, and he listened to the game next to his dad's cemetery spot. Because he had said, he'd always remembered, my dad said we're going to go to the game together. 15 years after his father passed away, he went to the cemetery and listened on the radio. He could have afforded to buy the ticket. That wasn't the question. But he wanted to have that bonding experience that his dad had promised him all that time. That's the difference between sports and anything else. You can't even explain that example. You can't explain it. If you try to explain it to people in other places, they're like, that's crazy or what? But for those two who hadn't been together for 15 years, for that night, they were together, right? Fancy that, okay? Sports also challenges us at times to think about others. And we'll get to kind of what's going on in the U.S. right now. But how many people know the picture on the left? I'd be interested to know. The picture on the left, do you know what that's from? Anybody know? So in 1968, the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, okay? In the 1960s, the U.S. was going through a very, very difficult time. It was not a favorable time for our nation. There was a lot of conflict, civil rights, was all sorts of conflict, and we made it through it. But in 1968, African Americans and whites and Hispanic, there was not a lot of togetherness. These two sprinters, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, were entered in the Olympics in the 200-meter dash. They finished first and third in the 200-meter dash. The person on the left, which we'll talk about in a second, is an Australian man. So the two Americans. The two Americans were so passionate about what they thought was and wasn't right in their country that during the celebration of the national anthem, when they played on the podium and the medal stand, when they played the U.S. national anthem, they each brought out a different hand with a black glove to indicate how they felt about injustice in the United States and injustice in human rights. Okay? This really had not happened before. Well, let me tell you, after that happened in the United States, these two, they got death threats. There were more people angry about it, but you know what they did? They called the attention to the people, like I said earlier, that were oppressed and were not being treated appropriately, didn't have a set of civil rights. They paid a huge price for this, huge price for what they did. But by calling attention to it, decades and decades later, fortunately, we've been able to make some progress on it. But it took something at an international event like this. So I told you the story. I told you about the fellow on the left. His name is Peter Norman. So everybody in the world knows this picture for the most part, and they know when we talk in the U.S. and other places, they know the story of Tommy Smith and John Carlos. The story of Peter Newman is an Australian who finished second, silver medalist. In fact, the 200-meter 1968, the time that he ran the 200 meters in that event, still is the record for Australia today. It hasn't been broken in 40 or 50 years. That's how impressive it was. He actually, see this little blue patch? He knew what the two Americans were going to do, and he said, I want to do something with you. And he saw another person, a worker, had this badge on for Olympic civil human rights, something. He said, here, give me that. And he put it on his warm-up. You can see this is his Australian uniform, and that's the patch that he put on. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't say anything, whatever. He went back. Because of this incident, he goes back to Australia. He can't get a job. He can't do anything because people said, why are you protesting human rights? What do you have against our country that you would do that, right? And so even though he was capable and he was one of the fastest at the 200 meters in Australia, he was never selected again for their Olympic team, ever, okay? And because of that, he eventually got into depression and alcoholism and passed away years and years ago. But most people don't know who he is, but his protest was just as impactful as the two guys raising their hand, okay? All three of those people made a sacrifice for a cause and for something else that only an athlete could do on a stage like the Olympics. And the picture on the right is just from a few years ago. Again, the United States was going through some real turmoil with African Americans and police relationships. And three of our biggest basketball stars, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and Derrick Rose on the left. That was a famous expression when one of the African Americans that was young people that was killed, he actually, before he passed away, said, I can't breathe, and he was being choked by a police officer. And so these basketball players called the attention to the issue. And it kept a dialogue going on an issue that was very sensitive, okay? Sports also teaches us about sacrifice. And this is the story that I was saying earlier about, famous, impactful athletes. This is the story about Muhammad Ali. How many of you know the name Muhammad Ali? It's one of the most impressive things I've ever... Every time I go and do this in every country that I've ever done it in, and I talk about Muhammad Ali, more hands go up than any other person that we mentioned the entire presentation. He's the greatest athlete in the history of the world, and it's not close. Second place isn't close to Muhammad Ali. But sacrifice. He was the light heavyweight champion in the 1960 Olympics in Rome at the age of 18. Youngest person to ever win a gold medal in boxing still to this day. Okay? Came home to the U.S. And again, we were going through the 60s, a very difficult time. He went on to win 2 heavyweight championships in the first couple of years that he came back. Okay? But when he was 24, 25 years old, he saw what was happening in the country, drafting. He was drafted and was supposed to go serve in the Vietnam War. Okay? And he said, I can't do it. He said, conscientiously, I cannot serve. He changed his name, changed his name to an Islamic name, and huge controversy. He was actually prosecuted and convicted of draft evasion, and he was sentenced to jail for 5 years. Okay? He never served. He appealed, but his appeal took 4 years to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. 4 years. During the time that he appealed, he was not allowed to have a boxing license because he'd been convicted. Until that conviction was overturned, he couldn't box anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world, would not accredit him to box. Okay? He gave up 4 years of one of the greatest careers, and he's still considered the greatest athlete of all time, but in his prime, between the ages of 25 and 29, he couldn't perform his sport. He made an incredible sacrifice and brought attention to all of these other sorts of causes. Okay? So sometimes through sports, through athletes, we learn what sacrifice is because we don't do it ourselves, but we learn from other people. Okay? We also talk about this on the gender side. Okay? Unfortunately, it took until 2012, the London Olympics, before the Saudis would send females to the Olympics, which seems crazy in one regard. 2012, and we have a country that doesn't even send females to the Olympics? Okay? It raises the interest. Suddenly people now knew, well, why is that? One of the big questions that happened was people said, why? They were so dumbfounded that they were like, tell me more about that. And so eventually we learned more about the plight of females in Saudi Arabia, couldn't drive, all sorts of other issues, and they began to investigate it. The media shows up. Things are changing in Saudi, not because they want to, but because of drawing attention to it by sending a group of females to the Olympics and people saying, why haven't you been here before? And they tell their story, okay? Or the story of these Iranian females who played football in hijabs, okay? I don't know if you knew this or not, but the FIBA, the International Federation for Basketball, until just recently had a rule that females could not wear a hijab playing basketball. Could not do it. So think about all the female basketball players in the world, and they said, you cannot wear a hijab. Do you know why the rule was? Do you know why they outlawed it up until recently? Because they said it was a safety issue. And once they said that, everybody's like, safety, how so? How does something wearing on her head, how's that a safety issue? They said, well, it could fall off and get on the floor. Yeah, exactly. No, it was just discrimination, flat out discrimination. Okay? But by fighting through it, we've made that change. Again, sometimes sports can break boundaries, can break norms that otherwise couldn't happen, calling their attention to it. Okay? But it's not just about pro sports or amateur athletes. Sometimes it's just about physical culture of sports. And I had a couple examples here. This is from your country. This is from Ukraine. This was at the Indian Embassy when they did an event, I think it was a year or two ago, kind of introducing yoga and making a big splash about it. Some of you may or may not know Michelle Obama on the left, but Michelle Obama had her own cause called the Let's Move campaign. And it was strictly just to get young people up, moving, active, whether it's dancing, running, any kind of sports, anything like that, but moving. That was her idea. And also, why does this matter? The 10 countries, 10 of them, with the longest life expectancy of their citizens, all of them have a life expectancy over the age of 80, are also the 10 countries that have the most invested in physical culture in their society, meaning government, NGOs, sponsors, everything like that. They've made a decision that in the best interest of their own citizens to invest just in wellness and good health, that they've exceeded now life expectancy. So you're talking about countries like Japan, Singapore, Australia, on and on and on, who value that and are a part of it. So it's not just about pro sports or amateur sports or getting paid for it. It's about that. Sports is also a tremendous platform for philanthropy, particularly in the West, particularly in the United States. I could spend 2 hours on nothing but philanthropy through sports in the U.S., both through their athletes, through their teams, through their leagues, through their federations. 2014, the Invictus Games. How many are familiar with that? It's Prince Harry's initiative, right? About wounded servicemen having an opportunity to, I think the next games, or they just had the ones in Toronto in 2017. Only 3 years old, but now calling attention to the plight of wounded servicemen returning back to society. What do we do for them now that they've lost a limb or they've had some other infirmity as a part of it? Cancer, whether it's breast cancer or any sort, the National Football League spends the month of October in getting uniforms in pink. So if you have a team that's in blue and red, for the month of October, they have pink in their uniform. Again, to call attention to the millions of people who've passed away from breast cancer and how much we need money for research. Okay? And that's just the NFL, that's just one. Okay? In soccer, the Homeless World Cup. Okay? Again, calling the attention to the issues around the world with homelessness. Okay? And then sort of last, I think many of you might know the global cause, but Sport for UNICEF and some of the international ambassadors. So again, whether it's an individual athlete, whether it's a club, whether it's a federation, whether it's any mix of those, but what sports can do when properly organized for philanthropy, driving investment that other platforms can't do. But we still have issues. We still have issues. We're not even close to anything being resolved in a lot of these places. Some of you may or may not know that in the United States we're having a very, very challenging time right now. Little over 1 year ago, the person on the right, Colin Kaepernick, who's a quarterback for an NFL team, made the decision that during the national anthem, which traditionally, at least in the U.S., and I'll be interested to know here, everyone stands and generally most people put their hand over their heart, sing something about it. He decided he was going to take a knee during the national anthem. And it was incredibly, incredibly controversial. Now, he was taking a stand for what he thought was, again, back to the John Carlos, Tommy Smith, black glove, about the oppression of certain aspects of society in the United States and whether they actually truly had full civil and human rights. He was calling attention to that. Okay? Well, it didn't go away. Other athletes, other football players began to do it. They're still doing it today, and it's still an issue that we're talking about. But it's bringing attention to a question in our society is, are we treating people with basic human decency and human rights? All people. He has sacrificed. He has not been in the league this year. No one is going to sign Colin Kaepernick as a football player. Unfortunately, his career is probably over, but he has sacrificed for somebody else. And again, there's a lot of attention on American football in our country. Every media company follows it, so you can't miss. This has been that sort of platform to raise the sort of issues, okay? And it's not just in the U.S. Just the other week, the Berlin team in the Bundesliga showed their solidarity, if you will, on that issue. This was really the first time that it sort of left the borders of the U.S. and is making its way elsewhere. Now, they have a couple of American players on this team, so I think that probably had something to do with it, but it caused quite, and again, calling attention to what is that? Why are they doing that? Why are they there? Okay, and doing that. It's pervasive into social media. So social media is less than 10 years old, right around 10 years old if you look at Facebook and you look at Twitter when they started. They're right around that age. And already, sports is having an incredible amount. Of the top 10 social media Instagram accounts, 7 of them are females, and we're talking about the Jenners and all sorts of others. The 3 men. Do you know who do you think are the 3 males in the top 10 Instagram number of accounts? We know Ronaldo's one. Who do you think the other 2 are? No.
Messi.
Huh?
Messi.
No, unfortunately not. Who else?
Brady?
Huh?
Brady?
No. So I'll give you another hint. They are not professional athletes.
Donald Trump.
No. No.
Bieber.
Huh? Justin Bieber is one, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is the other, who was a wrestler, not really an athlete, but a movie star. Those 3, okay? And Ronaldo's moving up. He's at 113 million as of the other day. He probably will be in the top 3 or 4 very soon, okay? So that's how important sports is to driving usage and awareness of now social media platforms, okay, going forward, okay? But literally, sports connects our passions, and the number one thing, okay, just so my friend here, we're going to experience this on Sunday night. The reason why we continue to attend is I can guarantee you this, if nothing else. If you go to a match upcoming, even though you've been to the match a year ago or 6 months ago, whatever, you go to the next one, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. That's why you go, because you want to see what the outcome is. Think about going to a movie, especially if the movie is based on a book. You go to the movie and you're like, well, I know how this ends, but we still go to the movie, okay? But in sports, it's an entirely different circumstance. We go having no idea how it's going to turn out, and that's what's interesting to us. And so if you're involved in the sport business, that's the hook to getting people to continue to pay attention, because, hey, you don't know what the outcome's going to be, okay? Hopefully it's not fixed, right, to do it, okay? But we have a lot of challenges, whether it's on our country on the right or whether it's in other places around the left and around the rest of the world. we still have that passion that we've talked about for the first 45 minutes or so. That passion sometimes spills over and becomes a negative, okay? And we still have that. So we have to have platforms and campaigns to educate particularly young fans and young people the difference between good passion and passion that goes poorly, okay? And what about behaviors that come along, okay? Unfortunately, again, not enough progress. Think about females make up more than 50% of the world's population. More than 50%. But for some reason, in our international sport bodies, whether it's FIFA, IOC, federations, etc., 30% or less of the major positions, heads and board of directors are made up of females. Sometimes you have to just look at them and say, what are you waiting for? If 50% of the population is females, why aren't at least 50% of the board seats and the heads of presidents and leagues and things like that, why aren't they females? Okay? Again, sometimes it's hard to explain. Okay, that sort of brings me to the end of the formal presentation. I wanted to take questions from you. I wanted to ask you all some things as well. So I have some microphones here, which I think are on. So who has a question? Wait for the mic, so I think the streaming...
Sorry, my friends, my name is Max. My English is very bad.
That's fine. Max, where are you from, Max?
I'm really sorry. I'm President Ukrainian League of American Football. Ukrainian have 28 American football teams. We have children teams. Yep. We have girl teams. And I hope after this election talk to you. What do you think about this? Because we have more questions for you.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but you're from Ukraine? You're from
yes,
Kiev?
I'm from Ukraine. We have a friend, Americans coach Crockett Oaks. He have job in American Embassy. Okay. And we can talk.
Okay.
There, yeah?
So what questions do you have?
Can we talk? Can we have some talk after?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. It's all.
Is this working? By the way? It's okay. It's working. Any other questions? You must have questions. I have questions for you if you're not going to have questions for me. So, questions. Questions. How about sport in Ukraine? Give me your impression of sport in Ukraine. There you go.
Okay.
First of all, your name and where you're from.
My name is Julie. I'm from Ukraine.
Okay.
Yes, I think that in Ukraine, sports is not so successful, maybe not so famous, because the main, how to say, topics in Ukraine, it's politics, first of all. Mm-hmm. And but I think that our people, and especially maybe our politics, should, how to say, have attention to this area, because I think that sportsmen should have, I don't know, success and to improve their skills and to show the country on the different competitions. That's why I think that politics should take attention to this area and help the sportsmen to be much more better, to show these competitions that to represent our country better, maybe.
So I can ask you a question.
What do you think about this?
I think it's fantastic. So my question back to you is, do you think that there are one or two issues, think about some of the issues that are now moving around the country or have to be dealt with. Do you think there are one or two issues that if an athlete or his team or his federation or his sport, whatever, got involved, or her federation got involved and brought those issues to the attention, are there one or two issues you think that if they were attached to sports or attached to an athlete, that they would be better off, that they would get solved faster, or that things would move quicker or better in this country? Are there one or two issues that you think if they were attached or somehow connected to sports or an athlete, it would improve faster? The change would happen sooner. What might they be?
It could be.
What would the issues be? Give me an example of the issues.
It could be, but we have wonderful examples of nice sportsmen. Sergei Rebrov, the footballer, Shevchenko, the footballer, some boxers. It depends as any department of the country. If we think globally, we have to do our best for our youth, for our future generation, and then we see the results. If we work hard, if we do our best, all the same, we have to reach better results. And if we don't speak about professional sport these days, what I see in Kyiv, by the way, I am from Donetsk region, but the situation is the same around the country. I know many nice guys, I mean, not teenagers, but in early 20s, in early 30s, who goes in for sports on regular basis. It doesn't matter. It's not always a question of money. I mean, to buy a nice car to a nice top sport club. They are very nice here. By the way, maybe you have visited Sport Life here. They have best equipment. They have wonderful swimming pools. I can organize you excursion there if you want to see what the people do. I know that youth is interested in healthy way of life, not only healthy diet, but regular exercises to keep fit. By the way, they buy American watch, Garmin, I think.
Garmin,
nice programs. We observe our results. A lot of people involved in marathons. They are always practically for organized free training during different periods of time. Nation is ready to change a lot and start from ourselves to keep fit, to be healthier, to think positively. And we know that our physical and mental health are always together. So try to help us, and we are ready to do our best.
She was talking about that, which is having an athlete or having a team attach themselves to a cause. You know, we just saw that slide back there, whether it was breast cancer or whether it's homelessness or whatever. They will then raise the awareness. Maybe it's just general physical fitness or whatever. They will raise that awareness, which will cause more people to want to be involved, which will then put more pressure on the government to fund these kinds of initiatives because, again, politicians want to do what's typically most beneficial or most popular for them, and to do that in order to get reelected, et cetera. So I have yet seen that. That's what I'm going to be looking for this week while I'm here, as I'm going to be looking around to see what teams, what leagues, what clubs, what athletes are invested in issues that matter to them. Maybe it's adoption. Maybe it's other things that they feel strongly about that they then use their platform to bring awareness to so that things change faster than they ordinarily would have.
But it has to be more global process, not to train just 2-3 champions for the country.
Yeah.
Global processes need many activists like these guys. They described how many teams have they collected to bring up the new generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Main idea.
Okay. And then the other thing might be just participation by females. It might be something that we see as, you know, we don't have enough or don't quality or they're not funded well enough. But again, it's going to help the entire population when you have more of the population included as you go forward, as opposed to taking some and leaving others behind. And that's why it was so important we talked about, or we saw examples in the sport landscape, is the rules are the same. Men and women, the rules are the same. They both play basketball. They might play at different levels, but in terms of their competition, it's the same. Okay? And how do we do to get more, you know, young girls and women involved in those activities, which can lead to other opportunities in education or other things along the way?
But the question of nice funding during September, I was observing a nice ski court to train a young girl in figure skating. They are not available. Only in trading center, like entertainment. So money is always important issue in any project. And we are not ready to say that we have nice hockey teams, nice sportsmen in skating,
Yep.
I mean different kinds of skating, racing, figure skating, sport jump, something like this. We don't have nice skating rinks even in the heart of the country.
Yeah.
None of them. They are not available for a big number of people, only top children who are ready to become the future winners. But who knows?
Mm-hmm.
If 10 parents rent the first, they get these places, yeah?
So thank you for that. So I can tell you, no matter where I go or no matter who we talk to, there's two things that there's never enough of. There's never enough money and there's never enough time, okay? So I can assure you that programs that you start thinking about today they will be successful. If they're not as successful today as you think that they will be, the question is time. And that's not something we have control over, right?
Always time and money.
There's one person who controls time, and he's up there. He's not in the room with us. He will decide what the right time is, okay? But our responsibility is to continue to do what's right and do the right things. But if you're doing those right things and creating opportunity for others through sport. My man in the back here with a question.
Thank you. I want just...
And I'm sorry, your name and where you're from?
Leo, I'm from Kiev. The lady said that folks here are more interested in politics than in sports. I would just contradict to that because my friend, he's a physician, so he's not very affluent.
Yeah.
So he's got 2 children. One child is 20-year-old. He studies in the U.S. and he's very good. I think he is sort of a group champion in tennis.
Okay.
He plays for some university there. I don't know go into the detail. Now he's got an 8-year-old girl, actually, just female sport. And she's just going to tennis, 8-year-old, and acrobatics. And I accompanied him once to an acrobatic hall here at the military center, next to, if you want, you can see that. Yeah. The facility is more or less rudimentary, but, she's okay. He's paying like $15 per month for 4 days, 4 times per month, 2-hour session. And they are okay. They are progressing. So I think you would just concentrate on sports for kids. Yeah. Because they have the grounds. If there is a wish, there is a way. Yes. So we can just complain and ask back for money and say, well, we are just in collapse. But if you are interested in that, you see, the example of this physician who brought his child to just some height in tennis playing, he went to the U.S. because he's got a scholarship, because he's a good tennis player. Yeah. And then he follows the example of this child who is 20-year-old with his, smaller, like 8-year-old girl. And it means that, the father has got brains. If the father has brains, there is a way to do that. It's not very huge money to pay for the participating in the class. So everything should go private. If there is just a government run, let's get rid of these government run, subsidies, because it's corruption and just malfunctioning, and these, functionaries. There are lots of, intermediaries in this process. But if it's more or less private, if he pays like $20 per month, and she's succeeding, acrobatics and tennis, it's okay. It contributes to the strength, and then she will have a very nice strike if she's a good tennis player.
Yeah, he raised a good point, because one of the things that I'm here the rest of the week to work with, the organizations that we're going to be with, is one of the things that they really wanted to know is, how is the U.S. so successful in their amateur and Olympic sports when the government provides no money, none? Our Olympic committee, our Olympic team gets no money from the government. 1978 passed a law that said no funding for the government, for the Olympic program. Everybody at the time said that will be the death of the U.S. Olympic. Guess what? They've been more successful because of the private interest that got involved and the money. When you say, hey, there's no more money from the government, you've got to do it, you'd be surprised how creative people can get and how invested that they can get. But that takes some time, like I said, some time to do that. The part of it is then to say, we believe in this because it's good for our population. We may not produce all these gold medalists and champions, but we know that it's good for our population, and so we're going to go out and ask people, and the thing that I'll be working with them on is, how do you ask people for that money? Like I said, what do we get in return? What is that process like? Because when the funds are not there from one source, you have to go over here and find it. And it's a challenge here. I mean, what's the population? 45 million people in the country, something like that. It's not a lot. And maybe there are better facilities in Great Britain or the U.S. That's fine, but you start somewhere. You start somewhere. And maybe if they progress to the point where they are really good, you have one of the top 8 women's tennis players in the world. Do you know that? Who is it?
I don't remember her name.
Oh, come on. She's one of the top 8. You can't remember her name? Oh, she's going to be mad. Svitolina? Svitolina? Female, right? You don't know? No, I know she's Ukrainian, but maybe she lives in the U.S. most of the time. But anyhow, Elena Svitolina? Huh? Svitolina? Okay. Yeah. At least a couple of you knew. All right. Question. Did you have a question?
I have kind of a question, comment thing. Hi, my name is Alex. I'm from Ukraine. About private or not, like, I do videography as a hobby, and I run into a bunch of girls that do like volleyball, basketball, and dancing.
Yeah.
Like all these girls are from like low-income, troubled families, and they just like group together. And after school, like they have problems in schools too, since they're not very socially accepted. They try to fork in who has like 100 hryvnia or more or less to just rent a gym, and they actually like practice 4 times a week. And that's one thing I would really love if there was be like government like gyms where you could just like they're youth, they're amateur, like they will never be on like a pro level, but it's just something that gives them like hope and like they can't go home because there's this, like a father with a drinking problem. But this way they like have a purpose in life and they meet people who have like the same interest. It was so like heartwarming.
Yeah, he makes a good point. So when we say no government support, that's for our Olympic community. But make no mistake, our local communities do support with investments in parks and some, courts or some facilities like that. There's a basic, commitment at the regional and local government level to put money back into their citizens through these kinds of programs so that they can go to the library or go to clubs or do some things like that. Because again, the statistics and the research is clear. The more healthy your population is, the less you spend on medical and hospitals and things like that. And so you're either going to spend it one way or the other. If you don't invest in health and wellness, you're going to end up investing in hospitals and rehabilitation as people age and are not healthy. Whereas and they also have proven that the amount of money that you spend at the end is 10 times more than what you would spend at the beginning by investing in some basic parks and activity centers and different things of the sort. But it's a challenge because, as we said about politics, everybody thinks they have a certain priority on the money. I think it should go here. That person thinks it should go there. Sometimes athletes and people can come through and advocate for money that they'd be easier to get from government or other sources because of their popularity, okay? As well as what they're willing to put in of their own money from what they've made over the course of their career. Those are good questions. Hi.
Maybe I don't want to ask questions. I just want to add some information about the fact that money is not everything, in my opinion, because, for example, my husband is from Lithuania, and Lithuanian nationality has a specific feature that they are crazy about basketball, and their country is too little, but their team is very successful around the world. So here, we live here maybe 1 or 2 years. My husband lives here for 2 years. He managed to find a lot of Lithuanian people in Ukraine. They made a team, a basketball team here without money. They found a place where to train. They went to Lithuanian embassy and asked some money to make uniform. Now they play with Budivelnik in Kiev, and they make different competitions. Of course, in a local atmosphere, in a local place, but still they have a desire and they promote without any additional money. So that is why it's not everything.
Yeah, so she makes an excellent point. She talked about Lithuania. Šarūnas Marčiulionis, one of the greatest basketball players in the world, Lithuanian, played in the U.S. for a long time. We've had a number of Lithuanians who have done very well. And what she talked about was the concentration and the focus. And again, we talked about the greatest sprinters in the world coming from Jamaica. Really small, tiny islands, surrounded by water, like all the reasons why I really, you'd say, if you were betting, you would not have bet that Jamaica would have produced that. And sometimes it's the concentration of deciding if we don't have enough money or we're short of it, what will we concentrate on? And now I think many people would automatically say football, and that would be a natural instinct, but maybe there are other sports where concentrating on it, investing in it, training, supporting, you can actually generate further, because we said we're small, we don't have as much, what are we going to focus our efforts on? Which sport? 1 or 2 sports? Maybe it's 1 male, 1 female in order to raise the level. Because as soon as that team does well, when Lithuania does well in the Olympics, everybody says, Google, where's Lithuania? Right? I'll tell you a great story about Qatar getting the World Cup. People are saying, well, they shouldn't have it. Whatever the circumstance is, I can assure you this. Because they got the World Cup, and because we were going there to work at times, so when you travel, when I leave the U.S., I have to call my credit cards and I say, hey, I'm going to be traveling, I'm going to be here and there, and make sure they know it's not fraud if they see it being used in another country. So I call up my credit card company, and the woman is in a call center somewhere in another state, very nice woman, and I say, Linda, she answers the phone, hey, this is Linda, can I help? And I said, Linda, I'm going to be traveling, and I want to give you an advisory on my credit card that, so you don't think it's being used fraudulently. She said, great. And I said, I'm going to Qatar. Do you know where that is? And do you know what her response was? Didn't they just get the World Cup? Now, this is a woman who otherwise would not, why would she even have heard it? But she said, didn't they just get the World Cup? I think I read about that somewhere. And I told the people in Qatar that story. I was like, you see how this works? Every other thing that you've planned, that's worked out great. This was unplanned. They didn't tell Linda in Minnesota, hey, we got the World Cup. She saw it through all the other media coverage to do it. People will discover Ukraine and the population of Ukraine through some of these sporting opportunities who now say, oh, he's from. Hey, all of a sudden the Google searches go up, all these other kinds of things potentially, and then commercial organizations say, maybe we should invest some money there. Maybe we should open a business or open a plant or something like that. So again, there are other ways to do it, but sports is this way that transcends other borders and boundaries and other things of the sort. So that's a good question, a good point. Other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am. You haven't asked a question or opened your mouth yet. What's your name? Where are you from?
Hello, I'm Sveta from Ukraine.
Your first name is what?
Sveta.
Okay,
yes.
Savannah.
I'm from Ukraine, from Kyiv. And my question is related to the sport in small cities and villages.
Yes.
For example, here we have the problem with this because in Kyiv we have a lot of opportunities for children, but cities, villages, yes, maybe we can have also good and healthy child and maybe good sportsmen from these places, but the programs we have too little. So I want to ask, maybe in US we have some programs, or have government or maybe some teams can support, or what we have in your country?
Yeah. So we have, it's a good question, thank you. So we have, for example, our national sport in the U.S. is baseball. It may not be the most popular today. American football is very popular. Basketball is very popular. But baseball is played by more children in the U.S. than any sport, soccer, anything else of the sort. Most of it happens like that, in a local small town, that at the very least, if they don't have anything else, they have a Little League baseball team or 2 or 3, and they play and they organize. Again, most of that doesn't come because they have the money. It's somebody who said, this is important, it's important to these children, and I'm going to sacrifice time or money or whatever in order to make sure that they have that opportunity. And so it's that personal choice. And one of the things about sport and athletics is when people see how successful it can be, they get motivated to then say, there's a community that doesn't have it. we're going to go there and we're going to start one. Or we're going to say, what do you need? We need gloves, we need hats, we need shirts. We will find a way to raise the money from other people to say, this should be done that way. Okay? How does that happen? We take the media that we have today. Think about social media, how powerful it is, right? To say, there are places in this country, there are places in this region that don't have this, that, or the other thing, and we want to support it. We're going to raise money specifically for that. We have a program in the U.S. with our baseball teams where one day a year, one game, fans will come to the game, and maybe 30,000 people come to the game, and they will bring their used or unused or gently used equipment, and they will donate it that day, and that equipment then goes to wherever. Sometimes we send it to other countries, sometimes we send it to populations in the U.S. that need it. So the cause that our sport organizations are focused on are usually associated with their particular sport, right? So if there are places in this country that the children can't play football because they don't have cleats or uniform or whatever, these clubs should be organizing activities that are community-oriented where the fans who come say, not only am I coming to the game, but I'm bringing this to the game as well. They collect it, and then it goes to those organizations that need it. That's how a lot of our youth sports are organized and funded. It's through donation of equipment or money or something else as a part of it. Everybody has something that they can contribute. They may not have money, they might have time. They may not have money or time, but they have gear that they used to use and they don't use it anymore. Where can I put that best to use? So if there are places in this country that are off the radar a little bit, there are organizations, pro teams and others, who could raise awareness and maybe even do those kind of community things to serve those communities that are in need. Okay?
If you allow me just
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. If you allow me just very brief comment to this lady's remark.
Sure.
I think Ukraine lacks philanthropy.
Okay.
It's a very rich country. You see, it has lots of tycoons.
Yeah.
Name a few. But, it's not common here just to be philanthropic. Just
Okay.
to set up even just in small towns, in villages, there are some, I wouldn't say oligarch, but, folks who have means.
Yeah.
And it would be just appropriate for them to donate money for a football or soccer team or whatever, just to have something installed and just be a sponsor. It should be favorable here. It should be a trend.
Yeah.
No one does that.
Yeah.
No philanthropy, nothing, no funding, nothing.
Interesting.
And secondly, I give you an example of the reference to the outdated equipment.
Yeah.
I had this August, my friend from Portland, Roger, he's golf, I think he was a champion or something like that.
Yeah.
He showed me a photo where with another guy, he won a tournament. He received $3,000 for two. So he came here and asked me, where can I find some golf club to play golf, because he's very passionate about that.
Yeah.
In August, I found him a location here and said, well, the clubs are very, used and very, I would just throw them away. I couldn't play with these clubs in the U.S. The field is neglected. The grass is very, very high. You should be cutting the grass, at least once a week or something like that. And the balls are also just bullshit. And mostly they charge tremendously, much more than in the U.S. for the basket of balls. So he said, well, I don't know how just to manage that. In the U.S., I would just pay 3 times, 5 times less for the basket to play golf on a much better, field with much better clubs and with much better balls. So, but that was a private club. They said, well, also he went just to get some glass of water. They charged him, just like $5 for a glass of water. So that's type of private business. Of course, they run private golf club for children. All the schools, it's very expensive, but they charge too much. So the businesses, who set up this type of business like golf, it's very posh, but they are very greedy in the end.
Yeah.
So again, everything ends up in the philanthropy. They had money in Cyprus.
Yeah.
No, that's in Liechtenstein. You see, but then they did not donating money to the country.
Well, again, just remember what we're talking about is we're talking about an independent 25 years, 26 years since you really had independence here in Ukraine? I mean, completely. So some of this is evolutionary, but again, it's introducing some of these concepts through sports and philanthropy in particular as to how to grow, how to match sports to causes, to philanthropy, to all these other things that then drive it forward faster, or they achieve something greater as a result of that. So that's a great point about the philanthropy piece. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, what do you think if the Olympics was more permanent locations, or like a few permanent locations?
I think it's been brought up, and I think it's an interesting idea. Here's why, and I might personally myself say, well, it makes sense. Let's do that. Let's have one location in Asia, one in Europe, one in North America, or Africa, whatever it is to do. But the IOC, being its own business, has its own interest. Now, they've made some tremendous mistakes in the last 10 years. Brazil was a tremendous mistake. Okay, South Africa for the World Cup was a mistake, not a tremendous mistake. But there have been some issues like that. But I think about this, though. Think about the child who once in their lifetime sees in their home country, in their own region, an Olympic athlete and is so inspired by that they go on to do it. Part of it is I don't think we should limit certain things just to certain parts of the world for that particular reason. Because I want to make sure that those children in Africa who saw the World Cup, or those children in Brazil that saw the Olympics, now say, this is something that I could aspire to. So I think the combination of the IOC's business plan, which is to rotate this around, but second, I think then you would be, yes, financially you would be securing that, but you would also be cutting out enormous parts of the population in the world who wouldn't have the opportunity to introduce those sports to kids. We had that in the U.S. in the 1990s when we had the Olympics and we had BMX biking for the first time. First time in the Olympics, BMX biking in Atlanta. 20 years later, we have millions of kids who do BMXing. Why? It was in the Olympics in Atlanta. That's the only reason. So that's the kind of thing that can come from that, even if it comes once. Other questions? Comments? Comments? Any other comments? Any questions or things? Again, we can adjourn, and then if anybody wants to come up and have individual stuff. But I would say this: I'm very optimistic based on what I've seen, about the opportunity. Just keeping in mind that 2 or 3 years from the last political revolution, 25 or 6 years from the crumbling of the Soviet Union, if this were the U.S., we'd be talking about 1800, right? Because we got our independence in 1776, 1800. There was no formal sports, it was all over the place. There was none of that. So keeping in mind where you all are on the timeline of that, in some respects, you all are the pioneers of what Ukraine will be 100 years from now. People will say, oh my gosh, how did they ever do it in 2017? They didn't have this and they didn't have that. How did they live, right? If you eventually have kids and they live to be 50 or 60, they say, I have no idea how my parents did that. How did they get along with just one cell phone or one car or whatever it was, right, to do? So in many respects, regarding sports, philanthropy, and all the other connections of causes, it's very, very early in the process. And I know you want, but that's what we're here to work out for the next week, and maybe eventually other times too, is to develop that and continue to progress. So I think that, I guess I will end because I don't know, but I just want to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming on a Saturday. I'm sure you have great other things. You could be shopping. You could be shopping again, and food and all these other kind of things. So the fact that you came here to listen, I'm very flattered by that, and I appreciate it. And again, you had my list of ways to follow me or get in touch. Oh, I know. We've got to take one picture before I go. So everybody stay right there. Okay? Everybody stay right there.